So what comes next for Tsarnaev, and what will a jury take into account when it comes to time for the sentencing? Joining me is Montgomery County Defense Attorney and former federal prosecutor Jim Shalleck. To give you some history on our guest, he's been in the D.C. area since 1989. Shalleck was a young assistant district attorney in the Bronx nearly 40 years ago when he was involved in the prosecution of serial killer David Berkowitz, also known as the son of Sam. Now another infamous case here on Johar Tsarnaev.
Yes.
What comes next in this guilty verdict, and what does the jury have to consider?
Well, what comes next is, does he live or does he die? The sentencing phase next week will allow the jury to decide, should he be executed by lethal injection or should he spend the rest of his life in jail without parole? That comes next.
Is this sort of like the death penalty, though, in California? What are the chances that anyone would be executed? Is this local jurisdiction, national jurisdiction, and then what's the history on executions?
Well, Massachusetts is a very liberal state,
right,
and they are not a death penalty friendly state at all. So it's going to be a big hurdle for the prosecution to get them to vote for the death penalty in Massachusetts.
Now explain again how this death penalty phase works. How long does it take for the jury? Walk it through. If I'm a jury member, what are you going to tell me as a judge?
Well, it's basically a second trial.
Mm-hmm.
The prosecution will put on witnesses, victims. Over 260 people were maimed. Dozens lost limbs. They'll put people on that lost relatives, 3 people dead, including a little boy. So the prosecution will put on victims to show the destruction, the evil, the horror that this young man did. The defense will put on evidence to show that he was just a young kid following his brother. His brother was the mastermind. His brother bought the materials. The brother is the key. If it wasn't for the brother, he wouldn't be sitting here. So it's going to be a battle of witnesses. It's a second trial, in effect.
Jury has to be unanimous on this.
Yes.
The worst case scenario, if he doesn't get the death penalty, he's still in prison for life without parole.
Correct. Correct.
You covered Son of Sam, and back then things have changed so much. There were no street cameras. There weren't the good police work that they did in Boston. They had help from witnesses, surveillance cameras. There are cameras everywhere now. You didn't have that with Son of Sam. How have you seen law enforcement change over the years, in both as a prosecution and defense?
Well, look at this case in South Carolina.
Right.
If it wasn't for the young man with the cell phone,
mm-hmm.
we wouldn't know what happened. So social media, cameras, that's changed law enforcement, because everybody's got a camera that they're walking around with. Everything is being recorded, so it's changed the dynamic of what people used to do in secret. Nothing's secret anymore.
That's correct. What was the biggest issue for the defense team on the Johar Tsarnaev case? What was the one major thing that they were up against the whole time, and how did they do, do you think?
Well, she's an excellent lawyer, his defense lawyer, and she took the wind out of their sails by saying he did it. But he did it because his brother forced him. He was under duress. He was a young kid under the charisma of his brother. She had no alternative. I mean, the case was outstanding,
right,
presented by the prosecution. They had videotape evidence, witnesses, the scrawl he wrote in the boat.
Right.
So, I mean, he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, no question about it. She's just trying to save his life.
Jim Shalleck, providing some insight this evening on News Channel 8. Thanks so much for coming in, Jim.